Greetings and welcome to the PLSQL Channel, a series of video trainings on the Oracle PLSQL language. My name is Stephen Feuerstein, and I'm a PL/SQL developer just like you. This lesson is part of my series on input-output in Oracle PLSQL, and the focus of this lesson is Introduction to the util file package. Quick reminders: if you haven't already done so, download all the code and supporting PowerPoint documents from PL/SQL Obsession, otherwise known as toadworld.com/sf. All the files I reference and run in my lessons are available in the demo zip file available from that website. Make sure you're comfortable with the previous lessons in this series, which of course is not much at this point, simply the introduction and overview. So file I/O in PLSQL with the util file package. Util file is the built-in package that is of primary use when you're talking about reading and writing files, operating system files on the database server. So util file does not allow you to read and write files on other servers, on your client workstation, etc. It reads and writes files on the same place as your database, the database server machine. You can open and close files. You can read and write the contents of files. And as of Oracle 9.2, so for a while now, Oracle added some higher level functionality. You can remove files. Well, that might not seem like high level functionality to you, but for us who have been around Oracle for a while, 9.2 brought the ability to remove a file. You can copy files, rename files, and you can also work with database directories, which I'm going to come back to in this lesson, a really key enhancement. So essentially, the basic operations for manipulating files. In this lesson, I'm going to talk a bit more about the util file package, how to use it where it is, authorizing access to directories, opening files, and closing files. So let's talk a little bit about util file administration. The util file package, like all other built-in packages, is defined in the RDBMS admin directory of your installation. So you go to Oracle Home, drill down to RDBMS admin, and you'll find the utilfile.sql file. In fact, let's take a look. Let's close all these other files out. Oops. So let's go to the RDBMS admin directory on my 11.2 installation. Here it is, all the way down to RDBMS admin. I go to utilfile, and here's the package that defines the specification of utilfile. A bunch of exceptions, which I'll come back to, and all the individual subprograms. fopen, fopen ncar, isitopen, fclose. These are all things that we'll actually look at in this lesson, and all the rest of the programs. And I encourage you to open up this file, take a look around, and just get a sense of what the util file package has in it, besides what's documented, besides what I talk about in my lessons. If you can't get access to the file, ask your DBA for read-only access. Of course, you don't want to change these files. And if your DBA will not give that to you, and they really should, well, then you can always download the Oracle version from the OTN, Oracle Technology Network site, install it on your own workstation, and then access the files that way. The util file package includes a long list of file-specific exceptions. This is new from 9.2 and very valuable. So let's go back over. You'll see a long list of exceptions: file open, invalid path, invalid mode, etc., etc., etc. They all have numbers in the -29,000 range. And here's the association of those error numbers with the error name. And most of the programs also document the exceptions that might be raised. So this is pretty helpful stuff. A lot better than it used to be, even though sometimes it seems like the exceptions that are raised are very non-specific, like, oh, invalid file. It doesn't tell you what's wrong with your file or the operation that occurred. It just says, sorry, invalid. So it's certainly better than it used to be, but it still leaves a bit of a gap. Note also that utilfile is not installed in Oracle XE. So if you're running the XE platform, you cannot read and write files with utilfile. Let's take up the utilfile 9.2 script. I wrote this file when 9.2 first came out to demonstrate some of the new features, most of which I'll be talking about. Let's see, that's not what I want to do. Let's go back over to my demo directory. Let's pull up the utilfile 9.2 script. And this script demonstrates lots of features of 9.2, most of which I'm covering in the rest of the elements of this webinar, of this lesson series. What I wanted to show you here was the use of these different exceptions. So here, for example, is when utilfile.invalid max line size. I tried to open up the file with a line size too large, which I will demonstrate soon. So I can check for specific named exceptions in the utilfile package and then take the appropriate operation like close my files, raise an error, whatever. But the fact is that you can check for specific exceptions at this point, and you should. Moving on, let's talk about enabling access to directories. So utilfile is available by default to all schemas connected to Oracle, assuming utilfile is installed and your DBAs have not restricted access. By default, everybody's got authority to run utilfile, but you also by default have no ability to actually read and write files. Oracle is very careful, very paternalistic, very cautious. They don't want you to, for example, accidentally delete some Oracle database files. And who knows what else you could do. You're reading and writing files on the database server. So, in order to read a file or write a file, your DBA or somebody with DBA authority has to authorize access to specific directories. How do you do that? There are two mechanisms. There's the old way and the new way. The old way is using a database parameter called utilfile_dir. And in the bad old days prior to 9.2, it was the only way to do this. You could set your utilfile parameter value, one or more different values, and then, and this is the really awful thing, you have to bounce the database. You have to stop the database and restart it for these parameter values to take effect. Well, that's not a very viable operation in the 24/7 world that we live in today. So while you can still use the utilfile_dir parameter, it's generally recommended that you not, and instead take advantage of creating a database directory. So database directory objects were introduced along with B files, binary files, as part of the large object implementation. And these elements are much more dynamic. You can create a directory at any point. You associate a directory with an actual directory on the operating system. And then you can read and write files in those directories if you have authority to, immediately without having to restart the database. So a directory is a database object defined with a create statement. By default, you do not have authority to create a directory. It's generally only a DBA action, and you need the create any directory privilege to do so. There's no create directory, only create any directory, so it's a powerful privilege, and it's not something you're likely to get from your DBA. You will instead have to ask your DBA to authorize the ability to read and write files in certain directories. They can do that, and then they can grant authority to you to run them, to read and write on that directory. So here's the example of creating a directory called error log, and I specify the actual error, the directory location. And then the DBA can grant specifically read and write privileges on a directory to a schema or a role, or to public if they wanted to. And the All Directories Data Dictionary view will show you which directories you can access. Let's take a look. So here are a couple of create or replace directory statements. I specify the name of my directory and the location. And the normal rules apply for these database object names. Even though I'm specifying it here in lowercase, it's actually stored in the data dictionary view in uppercase. And we can see that by taking a look at the all directories contents. So let's just see what directories I have access to. And I've got a total of 10. In fact, let's change this a little bit. Let's change it to show me also the name of the directory. So owner directory name path. Let's do this again. Notice the name of my directory is in uppercase unless I put it in double quotes, and there's the location that it's pointing to. So it's essentially a logical name covering up for the actual physical location. That's one of the advantages of the directory. The other advantage is that it will take effect right away. So one way or the other, the DBA has to say, okay, you're allowed to read and write files on this particular directory. And then you can start working with files. And the first thing you're going to want to do in general is open a file. So Oracle provides the fopen program function. To open a file, you specify the location, the name, the type of operation. Do I want to read, write, or append? And you can also specify the maximum line size. When Oracle first built utilfile, the maximum line size, which could not be changed, was about 1024 characters, which is not very much. In 9.2, Oracle added the ability to specify the maximum line size, but they didn't change the default. So you have to always specify that maximum line size if you want to get beyond this 1024 byte limit. And the fopen function returns a record of the type utilfile.fileType. So it's a predefined record structure. You can look at the structure inside the utilfile package. Currently, it's composed of three elements, the three fields: the ID, the data type, and the byte mode. And you can open up to 50 files per session. Let's take a look. So first I'll open a file for write access in my temp directory, and I'll specify a maximum line size of 32767. Then I'll do it again, but I'll specify a maximum line size that's a bit too big, 32768. Let's see what happens. Then I'll do the same thing, but instead this time I'll trap for the exception just to show you how you can check for specific exceptions. Then I'll open a file for read instead of write. And then I'll try to open a file for read that doesn't exist, and we'll see what happens. Run my script. Notice I get the invalid maximum line size error for that 32768. The negative 2987 error. I'll ignore that and continue. Look at my output. And in my second attempt to open a file with a line size too large, I was able to trap the error, so just to make sure you know you can do that. And then if I try to open a file for read and that file does not exist, it tells me invalid file operation. Now I added the words file does not exist. In other words, Oracle doesn't raise an exception saying the file does not exist. It tells you simply that it's an invalid file operation. I'm not sure if they did that for security reasons. For example, with a relational table, if you try to access a table that you don't have authority to see, it doesn't say you're not allowed to access this file. It simply tells you, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. No such table. They may have the same approach with files, but in any case, it's not very specific. So fopen is pretty straightforward. Pass it the directory, pass it the name of the file, the operation type, the maximum line size. If you specify a directory that doesn't exist, well, invalid directory path. So it tells you we don't know what you're talking about, or it points to a path that's not valid. Again, you don't know which one it is. In this case, it's simply the fact that the directory is not defined. If I try to pass it a operation type that does not exist, it tells you invalid mode. So I open my file. In a separate lesson, the next lesson in the series, I'll be talking about reading and writing the contents of files. So we'll take a look at that separately. There's one other file referenced on this page, which is fopen write conflict. Let's just take a look at that for a moment. Now, you should try this out in your own environment. What I was checking to see is what happens when I've opened a file for write in one session and then try to do it again in another session. And oddly enough, what I found is that in the old days, this might have changed in 9.2, if you open a file in one session, you can't open it in another session. It's locked. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So check it out for yourself. But as far as I can tell, opening my file with utilfile fopen does not put a lock on that file, and other people can open the file for write as well. So you might run into problems with lost updates to files. So be careful about that. You can check to see if a file is open with the file is open, utilfile is open function, and it returns true or false. The problem is that this function doesn't actually check the status of the file in the operating system. It simply returns true if the ID field of the utilfile record, the file type record, is not null. So it's not that much of a test, not that effective. It simply basically makes sure that your file handle is valid inside your session. Finally, closing a file, you call the fclose program. You pass it the file handle, and it performs the close operation. You can also call fclose utilifile fclose all, which I can show you right here. You can also call fclose all, and that will close all open sessions, all files open in your current session. And it's a good cleanup when something goes wrong, but in general what you want to do is open your file, perform your operation, and then close the file. And remember that it's not only important to close files when you're done with them, you also want to close them when an exception has occurred. Otherwise, the file will be left open, and the data that you wrote to that file will not be flushed out to disk. Conclusions. So utilifile is the package that offers basic functionality to read and write text files, though we're still going to look at the actual read and write operations. Your DBA has to authorize access to your directory. Just because you can call utilifile doesn't mean you're going to be able to successfully open and modify the files unless your DBA gets involved. You always work with one of those file handles, the record structures. So in other words, as you'll see, after I open a file, to read from that file, I have to specify that handle. And don't forget to close your files. Well, thanks for joining me on this introduction to the basics of utilifile operations. Next, I suggest you check out reading and writing files with utilifile. And make sure you download that demo zip, grab the files that I referenced in this lesson, and run through them yourselves. You may not have the authority to create a directory, or hopefully you have your own little Oracle instance that you've downloaded and installed, so you can play around all you want and get a sense of how you can work with these different operations in utilifile. Thanks for joining me, and happy PLSQL coding.